Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar. We'll give attendees just 2 more minutes to arrive, and then we'll get started. Stay tuned. Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar, exploring how CTV marketing teams are using creative refresh to drive performance. Following this discussion, we'll have some time for a Q&A, so please take advantage of that. You don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions. You can add them at any point during the session through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar platform. Everyone registered will also get a recording of this webinar in their inbox tomorrow, should you miss anything or want to revisit any part of the conversation. So today's guests are Brittany Haskins, Director of Customer Success at Mountain. Brittany works closely with clients to help them reach their KPIs and maximize their revenue by providing strategic audience, creative, and campaign insights. Brittany is a digital marketing leader with a passion for building relationships and developing innovative solutions for both clients and internal teams. She lives in Los Angeles with her fiance and Bassetoodle named Mia Wallace. We also have Alex Villa, Associate Vice President of Customer Success at QuickFrame by Mountain. Alex manages the mid-market client success team, as well as QuickFrame's partnerships with Pinterest, Sling, and Roku. She's focused on understanding clients' needs in detail, many of which are performance-oriented advertisers, in order to efficiently and effectively deliver high-performing video assets. Alex enjoys building client relationships and empowering clients to do more with video to scale their content across all platforms. And with that, we'll get started. Brittany and Alex, take it away.
There we go. Thank you, Ian. I'm just going to jump back into present mode here so everyone can see this. But yeah, so excited to be here to kick this off. I think we're really looking forward to diving in more to kind of the issue of creative fatigue. But before we do so, I think we just want to ensure if there's one thing that everybody takes away from the presentation, it's really just the understanding that creative fatigue is a real threat to brands and audiences in the marketplace now. But one of the best ways you can actually combat that is through creative refreshes in combination with the performance metrics you get when running your creative across platforms. So for today's agenda, we're going to focus on what creative fatigue looks like, what a creative refresh is, how to spot the signs of creative fatigue, and then the best ways and times to deploy that creative refresh. So what is creative fatigue? We define it really in two ways, either as ad fatigue or ad blindness. So ad fatigue is essentially when a viewer has watched an ad multiple times in a short time frame and is sick of it. So this is more commonly seen across CTV because it doesn't have that kind of scrolling interface capability where you can just kind of breeze past stuff. It rarely allows you to skip, and so you're then therefore forced to watch through the full ad, which can be great if you're a brand that's trying to improve your ad recall. But on the flip side, it also can lead to that faster ad fatigue if you're seeing the content too often. And then ad blindness is when basically you go to like a website or some kind of social platform and you're consciously or unconsciously scrolling through content and trying to ignore it. So, like I was saying before, like if you're on Facebook or Instagram, TikTok, you probably are used to the, just going through your feed, looking for, the new images or updates that people have posted, and really disinterested in seeing, an ad from a random D2C brand. So sometimes though, even if you do see it, you can quickly forget the content because of your ability to move past it. You're constantly being bombarded by the next thing. So it can be hard to really capture that audience's attention there. So now that we've kind of defined what creative fatigue means, I think it's also helpful to give the context of the timing and the average life cycle that you can expect your content to remain effective. And I think this slide provides a good baseline. Obviously, this is looking more so at some of those kind of paid performance channels outside of kind of the blog posts. But in knowing, you only have 5 hours on Facebook, 21 Instagram, or maybe 20 plus with YouTube, it's important to know that like it's incredibly short. Content is going stale faster than ever. So it's really important to have this in mind when you're thinking through what your strategy might be for how and when to deploy content. And I think, with a lot of the clients that we work with, they are more heavily focused on the performance channels, where unfortunately you see that these time spans or these average life cycles are much shorter. So I think to hit home on this point, it's important to share a QuickFrame by Mountain study that we did. So with this study, we looked at 60 different clients on the QuickFrame side across their kind of Facebook and Instagram accounts. It was various industries, so not specific to one vertical, but this just kind of drives home the point that your content becomes less effective the longer it lives in market. So here, what we saw on average was that after 5 days, there was a 5% decrease in delivery. By day 8, 1.5 users were actually watching the videos. And then by day 14, there was a significant jump in CPA. So I think this is important to note because it really just hits home on the fact that you're really going to get the most return on those ads within kind of the upfront portion that they're live in market. And I think one thing too to note just on this slide is that it is specific to the paid social data that we had for Facebook and Instagram. So just keep that in mind when looking at these numbers. Okay, so with that in mind, how can we battle creative fatigue? Obviously today we're focusing on creative refreshes, which are one of the best and most cost-effective ways to do it. It allows you, to keep the messaging fresh, to grab that slight sliver of attention you may have with your audience, and then also to consistently be testing and learning with the different iterations that you're creating. And I think, one thing that's important about creative refreshes is that it allows you to establish a data feedback loop so that you're only looking to improve the performance of your creative. You're essentially just building on what you know is going to work or not work. Because like we showed, a few slides ago, once you launch the creative, the clock starts ticking and your effectiveness is just slowly going to decrease. Okay, so putting this into practice, there's 4 steps here that we've identified that you can take to combat that creative fatigue. So first and most important is understanding how to spot it and learning, the signals and the patterns that you should be on the lookout for with the metrics that you're getting from your dashboards. And I think with a lot of the clients that we work with, the main KPIs that they tend to look at are spend, impressions, video completion rate, the CPA, conversion rate. These are really good as baseline metrics, but it's important to note that no one campaign is going to have the same end goal. So you should make sure that you're defining what that primary KPI is and making sure to keep an eye on that one in particular to understand when your creative may be starting to fatigue. So, for example, if the campaign's end goal is to drive site visits, and you're starting to see that metric, decrease. It's important to know that even if the other campaign metrics are doing okay and everything else is fine, that could be a good indicator that you may want to start to think about, what could a creative refresh entail. It may include, trying to hit your audience with a different message, maybe think about a different opening hook with the visual. But that's just, it's a key thing to be mindful of as you're looking at this data, day over day or week over week. And the one other thing to note too, unlike say with linear campaigns, with CTV and paid social campaigns, you can access this information, this data performance metrics in real time. So you can actually have the ability to stay on top of it. Okay, so step 2, now that you're starting to see, from monitoring the performance, what may be working or not, it's time to take those learnings and use them to inform what you can do to refresh that creative. And I think this is one of the most important steps. This is often where we spend more time, I think, in the upfront, because we want to be really thorough in our understanding of what those data metrics are telling us as it relates to some of the creative elements that are included in our content. And in addition to this, it gives us, the opportunity to take a step back, assess and understand what's working, and then formulate new hypotheses or learning objectives for what we may want to test next. So things that we tend to look at in this kind of phase 2 or step 2 are things like, okay, of the top ads that we have performing here in this campaign, what's the message that's included? What is the opening visual? Is there a specific talent that's performing in the top ad versus the lowest performing ad? Is there a certain location? So just making sure that although you're seeing one ad stand out from a KPI standpoint, you're also assessing, okay, what's actually creatively featured in that ad that I can then build off of. So again, it's important to take those learnings, use them to understand what's working, and then translate that into a new set of hypotheses that you may have for what can continue to perform well. So taking that to the next step, you then want to actually create those new assets. So you put this information that you've had with your hypotheses and what you want to do next into a brief. Hopefully you have more info up front, so it makes it easier to fill that out. And then your hypotheses should kind of help to guide the framework of that test plan. And this should be used then to develop that shot list so you can capture the content that you need to build out those video assets. And in this phase, you should really try and use the shot list as a checklist. You want to ensure that you're getting as many variations or versions of a shot or an action as you can on the actual shoot day, because you're not gonna be able to go back and do it again. So with that in mind, you should note that you're definitely going to walk away with way more content in the upfront, to create that library of assets than you may need for those first videos that you launch in market. But it's good. It just essentially means that you're planning and you're accounting for the variables that you may want to test. So then in the future, once you start to see what's actually working, you can be much more agile with your production, and you'll have the flexibility to be able to decide how you want to plug and play to create those iterations. So that kind of relates to this last step, which is watch and iterate, but you're essentially doing kind of these previous steps over again. And the purpose is you're seeing what's working, and then you're just trying to build off of those learnings. And I think it's important to call out that it's just as important to see what's working as it is to understand what's not, so that you can know, what not to do in the next round, what not to put your budget towards. So it goes back to that, consistent data feedback loop that you're getting, which is informing you on what you want to do. But it's also helping to then build out that library that you have to pull from. Okay, so to end my section in the presentation, I thought it'd be good to highlight a real life example from the QuickFrame side with a client who actually saw great success from this. So this client called Nurex is a personalized healthcare provider, and they came to us after seeing their ads continually kind of hit that creative fatigue. The iterations they were doing weren't kind of hitting the level of results that they needed to feel like they wanted to invest. So they came to looking for a partner who could provide kind of a more agile, innovative model to get a regular cadence of creative refreshes. So we essentially applied the same principles that we kind of just walked through with them. In the upfront, we did take a longer time up front to assess what they've been doing, what worked, what didn't work, and then we tried to work with them to kind of hone in on kind of a more focused test plan with specific hypotheses to kind of inform what we were really trying to test and learn from. And then as a result of that, so we could understand, okay, what's working and what's actually driving results for the business. So you'll see here, overall, it helped to improve their DR performance, also increase brand awareness, but they were able to reduce their CPA by 33%, while also increasing spend and remaining ROI positive. So I think all in all, a really good example of just why creative refreshes are important, but also how they can be successful.
Perfect. I will go ahead and take it from here. Now that we've talked about what ad fatigue is and what creative fatigue is, I want to review why it matters and how advertisers can best combat it. Advertisers already face an uphill battle when it comes to attention, so we want to ensure that you're not missing any key opportunities. Creative fatigue can cause a number of issues for advertisers. The number one is definitely negative campaign performance. If a user gets tired of seeing the same ad again and again, you're going to see diminished performance across your campaign and diminished efficiencies across a number of metrics, including cost per visit, visit rate, conversion rate, ROAS, and CPA. So it's definitely something you want to keep an eye on. It can also lead to wasted media budget. So if your creative is not making the same impact it was upon initial launch, it could be a good indication that users are hitting creative fatigue and it's time for a creative refresh. Lastly, it can cause an audience to turn on a brand. I'm sure everyone on this call today has an ad that they dislike. I know I certainly have one in mind. When a user sees an ad again and again and a brand runs the same creative all year long, it can cause a brand to wear out their welcome and ultimately a user to have a negative connotation with the brand. So we want to ensure that that doesn't happen at all costs. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is warning signs to watch out for that may alert you to the fact that it's time for a creative refresh. We just talked on the last slide about performance, which is obviously a huge indicator of creative fatigue. It's important to keep an eye on your performance metrics, and when you see downward trends, that's probably a key alert to you. You should use your performance goals to decide which metrics are most important to you and which metrics you really need to keep an eye on. Should also be on the lookout for video completion rates. So CTV ads are non-skippable, which means that if an ad is not being played in full, a user is likely disengaging with the ad actively, whether that means turning off the program or turning off the TV altogether. So if you start to see your your video completion rates decline, it's definitely indicates that a creative switch may be needed. Keeping all of this information in mind, as a best practice, we recommend advertisers to update their creative at least quarterly for evergreen campaigns. For more flighted efforts, we definitely recommend to keep your creative as up to date as possible, featuring any seasonal creatives that are relevant or promotional content. Okay, sorry. The 3 features to look out for in an ad platform that will help you fight creative fatigue. Sorry. You'll need an ad platform that offers real-time reporting insights so you can ensure that you're using relevant data to inform your creative decisions. Ideally, utilizing an ad platform that allows you to report not only on standard serving metrics like impressions and users reached, but performance metrics across campaigns and creatives over time. That way you can make the most informed decisions on which creatives you should be running and when. We also recommend using a reporting platform with a Google Analytics integration. This allows you to monitor ad performance across multiple campaigns and against other campaigns that you're running across your marketing mix, so you know when a creative refresh is needed. You should also ensure that your ad platform has strong cross-device attribution capabilities. As CTV devices are not clickable, you want to make sure that you understand when a user was originally exposed to the ad, and then ultimately when they visit or convert on a secondary device. Perfect. While performance metrics can definitely play a critical role in evergreen campaigns, there are other times when having fresh creative is very important to success. One of those times is the holidays. Sounds like far from now, but I know everyone's probably going to start holiday planning here in the next few months. The holidays are a high risk, high reward time on connected TV. The reward is that with snow and cold temperatures kind of sweeping across the nation, people are often indoors with their families streaming holiday content. I know I'm definitely at home binge watching holiday content and Hallmark movies, so you might be too. The risk is that more time consumers spend actually streaming television, the more likely they are to get burnout on these ads. The increase in CTV watching makes a creative refresh more important than ever. So I wanted to walk you through a case study from one of our clients, which is Eastern Standard Provisions. This case study focuses on using the tools that we reviewed today and making a plan ahead of time to ensure you're updating creatives during high impact and highly viewable times. In case you've never heard of Eastern Standard Provisions, they're a great company that delivers gift boxes featuring artisanal pretzels and snacks. Definitely recommend looking them up. But as you can imagine, like other DTC brands, Q4 is a pivotal time for them, and especially the holidays. So they came into Q4 with a plan to refresh their campaigns with updated creative to ensure their message stayed fresh for the holidays. Eastern Standard Provisions used their holiday opportunities to run a flighted campaign from December 1st through December 15th. During this time, they updated their CTV prospecting campaign to include a creative featuring Santa. It drove 1.2 million impressions, and it was a 30-second ad and resulted in high-value site visits. Next. Oh, there we go. Okay. In order to keep the creative relevant to the user funnel and decrease the chances of ad fatigue, Eastern Standard Provisions also launched a secondary campaign focused on retargeting users who had already engaged with the site. The top performing ad for that was 15 seconds and drove strong conversion performance across the campaigns. By planning for a creative refresh in advance and deploying new content during a high traffic time with high burnout, they were able to avoid creative fatigue and keep interest high despite higher viewing on CTV. They drove a 4.4x ROAS blended across those campaigns. So in order to unlock a steady stream of video and CTV content, we definitely recommend finding a creative partner that can streamline video production for you. You should prioritize a partner that can deliver high quality creatives at speed. With this type of partner, you can quickly iterate on new ideas or run last minute promotional content to ensure you're minimizing the risk of ad fatigue and never running an outdated video. You should find one that embraces a production approach that gives you plenty of options and allows you to test and refresh as needed. We've seen A/B testing skyrocket performance for CTV campaigns, so it's best to find a partner that allows you to make multiple creatives at a single time so you can refresh quickly and as often as you need. Doing these things definitely makes applying the best practices that we've shared much easier. So streamlined creative production and TV haven't historically gone hand in hand, so it definitely requires a different approach. Mountain's Creative as a subscription offering brings media and creative together so that your investment 100% goes towards performance. Marketers can now get a continuous supply of connected TV creative included in their media investment, making performance TV as accessible as paid search or social. With Cast, you have significant cost savings, opportunities for consistent A/B testing, ability to capitalize on seasonality, and faster, more agile video production. This allows you to simplify the production process and ensures a steady stream of new CTV creative. So to kind of wrap up all the things that Alex and I talked about today, creative fatigue is a real threat to your brand. Creative refreshes combat this creative fatigue by keeping your message fresh for the end user. CTV performance measurement component enables brands to test and monitor creatives, letting them know when a refresh is necessary. And the key to unlocking a steady stream of video in CTV creative is to streamline your creative production process. That's it for me. I think we're going to do Q&A now. Yeah, there you go.
All right, well, thank you, Alex and Brittany, for that terrific discussion. So we do have some time for questions. Again, as a reminder to everyone listening, you can submit these via the questions tab on the platform. So I want to start with a question for you, Brittany. You talked about the holidays being a good time to plan for a creative refresh. Are there any other times of the year you would suggest keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the holidays obviously is number one, but there's other times when streaming just increases through the roof. I would say definitely during March Madness, we see increased streaming rates with everyone watching basketball kind of on a 24/7 rotation. Also when you have peak sale periods. So anytime for a brand, if they're running big Memorial Day sales or President's Day sales, we definitely recommend increasing the amount of creative refreshes that you're doing.
So Alex, are there any brands or any situations where you wouldn't suggest a creative refresh?
Yeah, so as it relates to brands, I think every brand is going to be affected by this regardless of what vertical you're in. So, we're seeing, with the changes to the various social platforms with data and privacy, the content life cycle is dwindling. So I don't think that any brand is immune to it. But with that being said, I do think there are a few instances where it wouldn't make sense to jump the gun and want to do a creative refresh. One scenario is just, or it's more just kind of a best practice, but keeping in mind that you want to ensure that you're waiting to revise your creative and refresh it until you have enough data where you feel like you can actually act on the learnings. So you want to make sure that it's actually statistically significant enough. And to do that, I would say we recommend running your content at least 2 weeks in market. And in the past, we have seen if you put a decent amount of spend behind it within those kind of consecutive 14 days, you can get enough kind of traction with spend and impressions that you can take action on the learnings that you're gaining. And the other thing too with the statistical significance, it's important that it's 2 continuous weeks because you want to just basically weed out any blips that could happen. So if you launch something, say on a Thursday, you go right into a weekend, you want to make sure you have enough time to get through a full week and another weekend to account for any of those kind of increases or whatnot that you're seeing. And then on the other side of it too, I would say, I think it's important if you make the effort to put together a full test plan, you go and you capture a bunch of content, you should see that test plan through, and make sure that you're following through on the different hypotheses and learning objectives that you've outlined, so that you can get the most out of what you're trying to learn. And oftentimes, if you have existing assets or other content that's ready to launch, you're doing more of like a rolling cadence. That's okay, but you shouldn't feel like there's pressure to need to optimize at all times.
Yeah. So Brittany, with creative refresh best practices, you talked about filming a library of assets all at once to use in the future. How often should a brand refresh that library of assets?
Yeah, it really depends on the number of assets that you're getting within that refresh. I recommend doing it quarterly along with your plans for A/B testing, kind of like Alex mentioned. Getting them all at once at the top of the quarter allows you to set up your next 3 months successfully and saying like, hey, I'm going to test these creatives for 2 weeks to a month, and then I'm going to rotate. And once I actually get that data against which is performing the best. So I would do it at a minimum of quarterly. Some advertisers opt to do it kind of at the top of the year and get all of their assets then. But ultimately what that does is it kind of handcuffs you a little bit to not having creative that is relevant to the specific time of year or relevant to the world or kind of what's going on in the nation. So I would definitely stick to that quarterly if you can.
All right. So Alex, besides creative refreshes, do you have any other tips for combating creative fatigue?
Yeah, so this I think is something that we've seen across paid social most clearly. And again, it kind of goes back to the changes that we're seeing with kind of data privacy from Facebook or Google. And it's really the idea of kind of making sure that you're taking time to do concept testing versus more granular iterative testing. And I think in the past, once you kind of found that tried and true formula, you'd want to dig in, get really granular, and just try and do, rapid iterations. But we're no longer seeing that content perform as well because we don't have the same kind of life cycle that we've talked about. So focusing on the concept testing, so you're coming in with a variety of new ideas and then waiting to iterate until you start to see that performance, I think is another way to go about it.
Got it. And Brittany, earlier you said to look for an ad platform with cross-device attribution capabilities. How does this technology determine if a viewer makes a purchase on a different device like their phone or their computer?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Here at Mountain, we actually have an attribution technology called cross-device verified visits. What it is able to do is if a user is shown a CTV ad on their large screen device, it's obviously not clickable, so we want to be able to ensure that we can track any secondary devices to look for purchases and visits. Once we serve that ad, we're able to capture the IP address that the user was served on and cross that back to all other devices. So if you have a laptop at home, if you have a cell phone, if you have a work computer, things like that, we can track if any subsequent visit had taken place within what we call a verified visit window in order to match back that performance. So it's all really done through IP tracking and cross-device mapping.
All right, so it looks like we have we have 2 more audience questions, and either of you feel free to take this. So someone is asking, how often should you be doing A/B testing in an account, and how would you set those up to get clean results?
Yeah, I can start that one. And Alex, feel free to add anything that I missed. Yep. But you should be doing A/B testing as long as you're getting statistically significant data. I think A/B testing consistently is fine, just as long as you're making sure you're waiting that full 2 weeks to 1 month to ensure you are getting enough data to show which creative is better performing or which is making an actual impact. So we have some advertisers that are A/B testing all throughout the year. We have some that are only really doing it during high impact times. I always tend to see better performance from CTV advertisers that are consistently A/B testing and iterating on the findings that they have. How to set those up to get clean results? We actually have a feature within the Mountain platform that allows you to A/B test cleanly, which will basically split the audience in half and show one part of the audience, so 50% of the audience, one creative, and another the other, so you can compare results. What I do definitely recommend with A/B testing is isolating variables. So ensuring that you're only testing kind of one or two changes for each creative at once. You don't want to test two completely different concepts with 20 different CTAs or something like that, and then gather those results. It's easier to test different CTAs against each other, different lengths of video, things like that. Anything to add, Alex?
I think you covered it, but the only thing I would say is just that understanding and having kind of that test plan in place to make sure that you're staying focused on what the hypotheses are for the A/B test, I think is really crucial, and that can ensure that you're following a framework that will allow you to kind of continue to build on it, versus feel like you're kind of every round just kind of pulling from thin air and trying to come up with what to do.
All right. So final audience question before we wrap. Does commercial length have any impact on the refresh cycle?
Not really, no. So we run 15-second and 30-second spots, and I would say they require refreshes just as often, depending on which length you're doing, just as long as you're following kind of those best practices that we talked about.
Yeah, and I would say on the paid social side, that's fairly true as well. But we have found that I think with live action ads, we do tend to see best performance between more of like the 15 and 20 or so seconds. But for the most part, it's really dependent, I think, too, on what that content is and the goal of it.
All right. Well, we will wrap there. Thank you, Alex and Brittany, for your insights today. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening and for submitting questions. And have a great rest of your day.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.